Thanks indeed, Vice President, and I want to thank all of my colleagues and all of the members of the committee who have contributed their views on the amendments and their views on the state of the negotiation thus far. Can I be very, very clear to everyone? I'm not taking a doctrinal or an ideological approach to this. I'm taking a very pragmatic and practical approach to this. I'm saying that we have various ways of cooperation between third countries. Clearly, the great majority of those are done by way of equivalence. We have some examples of mutual recognition. We have equally some examples of passporting, but it's only in very small sectoral examples, as Pervenche said, and in ways in which there could be a derogation from existing legislation. So we have all of those there. I'm not being, I've no value judgment about each of those. I'm simply saying that's what we have. It has developed in a piecemeal fashion, and if actually you read the resolutions on Brexit thus far, which we have accepted by a massive majority, so there's a recognition of the piecemeal nature of the relationship we have on a financial services basis with third countries. That's all I'm saying. We need to recognise all of that. I agree with Pervenche. We need to be consistent with what other colleagues are producing in their reports. But equally, we need to be consistent with existing texts that this committee has established. And I cited earlier the example of the Bowles report, which made it very clear in terms of looking for greater consistency, coherence, transparency, a practical framework for procedures and decisions on third country equivalence, and then going on in paragraph 40 and 41 of that important report to talk about the importance of delegated acts and greater scrutiny. So that had a massive majority in Parliament. That's the will of Parliament thus far. Now, what I'm saying is we need to be consistent with all of those arguments, having regard to the text that is currently under negotiation. Can I take up a point that Philippe made? If we've learned anything from this crisis in the last decade, it is about the importance of working to reduce risk, systemic risk, not just for the European Union, but also for financial services across the globe. Developing the IOSCO standard, making sure that those principles are embedded in our own European law. Look at the whole corpus of legislation that's been established in the past decade. It is all about risk reduction on one side and reducing the potential of market fragmentation on the other side. So I think we've got to capture the report on the basis of those fundamental principles. On the question of parliamentary scrutiny, I hear what colleagues are saying. I think there is a majority from what I've heard, having regard to what other colleagues have said, about some form of scrutiny. The Bowles report spoke about delegated acts. I've spoken about delegated acts in my own report. Maybe there could be a potential to looking at a development of that, which would consider all of the equivalence decisions. Some of them are more technical. Others, all equivalent decisions are technical, Vice President. Of that there is no doubt. But some are evidently more political than others. Maybe we should look at developing a process of scrutiny that would require a more in-depth look of some rather than others. I'm just putting that out there as an idea which might attempt to bridge the differences that are there. But do I believe as a principle, is it right that we should have some scrutiny as a parliament on the relationship that we have with countries? Yes, I do. I actually believe it would be to the added benefit of the Commission, who are negotiating these matters, if they were to say to the negotiating people on the other side of the table, by the way, I have to get this through my parliament, ultimately. So let's work on an agreement on that. On the question of the role of visas, I'm open to looking at that again. Whether or not that should include enforcement and supervision is another matter, but certainly on the question of evaluation, which I have put into the report, I think that is important. I very much take the point that Pervenche said when we had the in-camera discussion with people from DG Visma about the importance of being able to turn on and turn off that relationship where you see a particularly risky development in some sector of financial services. Now that's more evident, I suspect, in some third countries than other third countries, given how sophisticated their supervisory system is, how developed their markets are, how risky their markets are. So I fully get that point that the Commission said, and I think we need to reflect that as well. But on the question of mutual recognition, I mean, it is no great surprise to people in this House to recognise that we have dotted across the financial services legislation, many examples of mutual recognition and work. Article 175 of Solvency II provides for, quote, mutual recognition and supervisory rules and practices on reinsurance for third countries. The agreement on mutual recognition with the United States and the EU and CCPs, going back to 2016, is a form of mutual recognition. The EU work in terms of its relationship with Swiss on non-life insurance is a form of mutual recognition. So I simply put those as examples that we do have cooperation in the area of mutual recognition, albeit not as full as we have it in the equivalent area, but it is nonetheless as an examples that we have there. So my concluding remark is really this. We have a lot of work to do in our hopefully 2 remaining shadow meetings. I think we've made a good start to this. I really appreciate the amendments that have been made. And my final remark is, I think it's important that we have a consistent, coherent text at the end of this process, which will help the Commission and policymakers generally see what is in the mind of Parliament. And that requires a broad majority, but it also requires something that is cognizant of what's happening at the moment. And I think we need to place the report in that context. Thank you very much indeed, Vice President.
Vielen Dank, Brian. Ich darf nur kurz daran erinnern.
Thank you very much, Brian. Perhaps I could just recall that the vote will be on the 18th and 19th of June. Probably in the plenary, it'll be for September. Then, in that case, perhaps I can move on to the next item on the agenda. That's item 4. It's just before 8 o'clock, but given that this is an indicative timetable, and I think that most of the people involved are already here,